Elaine Whitmore had long grown used to silence. The house on Chestnut Lane had once echoed with laughter, Sunday music on the radio, and the clink of teacups shared over conversation. But since her husband, Gerald, passed in '88, the silence had settled in like dust, always there, always thick in the corners of her heart. She didn't expect the mail to bring anything special, mostly bills, an occasional church bulletin, and offers she never opened. But on a crisp April morning in 1995, a single envelope lay atop her doormat. No return address, just her full name written in careful, looping script. She sat by the window with her tea, turning the envelope over in her hands. There was something almost sacred about it. A soft vanilla scent clung to the paper and the ink was dark as midnight. Inside was a single page, typed. No name, no signature. Dear Elaine, the world may seem quiet now, but I want you to know, your laughter once lit up more than just a room. It lit up lives. I remember. You are not forgotten. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. Who would write such a thing? And why? That night, Elaine placed the letter in the top drawer of her nightstand. She didn't mention it to anyone. She couldn't explain why, but it felt like a secret meant only for her. The second letter came exactly 1 year later, then a third, and so began a ritual that would shape the next 3 decades of her life. Spring returned, and with it, so did the letter. Same creamy envelope, same delicate scent, same typewritten words. It arrived on April 17th, just like the year before. Elaine stood by her door, holding the envelope like a relic. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age but from something deeper. Anticipation. A strange warmth she hadn't felt in years. Dear Elaine, another spring, another chance to remind you. You are seen. You are cherished. Your kindness has left traces time cannot erase. Keep looking out the window. Someone still remembers how the sunlight danced in your eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest. It was only a few words, but it stirred something sacred in her soul, like being remembered by time itself. After that, she began to wait for April every year. She never told her children. They lived states away, busy with families and careers. She never wanted to burden them with her loneliness. These letters became her quiet sanctuary. By the 5th letter, Elaine had a little wooden box where she kept them all, lined in velvet like it held pearls. Each letter was placed gently inside, tied together with a pale blue ribbon. Blue had been Gerald's favorite color. But as time passed, something curious began to unfold. The mailman, Walter, always delivered the letters in person. He wasn't the usual kind of friendly. He was reserved, kind, but never pushy. He'd been on the route for years, maybe decades. Quiet eyes, slow movements. Never rushed, never awkward. He would hand her the envelope with a soft, "Morning, Miss Whitmore," and a tip of his cap. She once asked, "Do you know who's sending these?" He only smiled and replied, "Just the messenger, ma'am." That became their inside joke. Just the messenger. Years passed like pages in a diary. Elaine aged. Her hair went silver. Her steps slowed. But the letters never stopped. They came every April. Each one felt like a love song sung by a ghost. Gentle, poetic, and deeply personal. Some spoke of memories, of swing dances and fireflies. Others spoke of her strength, of her resilience after loss. One year, the letter simply read, "You survived the kind of sorrow that folds some people in half. But you stood up. That's the kind of beauty that doesn't fade." By the 15th letter, Elaine was 68 and had begun to suspect the writer knew her past intimately. Too intimately. Had it been Gerald? Was it a friend of his? A stranger? Someone who had known her in youth? But how could it be Gerald? He'd passed too long ago. She'd seen him laid to rest with her own eyes. She'd kissed his cold forehead and whispered goodbye. And still, the letters kept coming. The 20th letter arrived when Elaine turned 73. Her fingers had grown thinner, more delicate, but her heart? It still beat with curiosity and hope. This time, the letter said, "I still remember the red dress you wore to the church picnic in 1962. You laughed so hard, you cried. I never forgot that sound. Some memories become sacred like that. Thank you for that memory." Her breath caught. That dress, that day. Only 2 people had ever seen her cry like that. Gerald and his younger brother, Walter. Elaine froze. Could it be? Was it possible? She looked out the window as Walter walked down her front steps, mailbag heavy on his shoulder. He paused just briefly to glance back, eyes lingering on her window, then tipped his cap and disappeared down the street. Elaine couldn't shake the feeling. After the 20th letter, after the memory of the red dress and the church picnic, something in her shifted. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something heavier, something closer to the heart. A recognition, almost. She sat at the kitchen table, all 20 letters laid out in front of her like puzzle pieces from a long-forgotten past. Each one was typed. No handwriting, no name, but every line pulsed with quiet love, deep knowing, and a kind of reverence that only someone who truly cherished her could hold. She remembered Gerald telling her once back in 1964, "If anything ever happened to me, I'd want someone to look after you, someone I trust, someone who sees you the way I do." At the time, she'd laughed it off, but now those words returned to her like a whisper from beyond the grave. The 21st letter arrived on a rainy morning. Walter's uniform was damp, his hair gray now, his eyes even more tired than usual. He handed her the envelope with a soft smile and a tip of his cap. "Still raining out there," she said, trying to meet his eyes. "Spring's just doing its work," he replied. He walked away before she could say more. She wanted to stop him, ask him something real, but the words caught in her throat. She opened the envelope at the table, steam rising from her untouched cup of chamomile. "Dear Elaine, this world may not always offer the answers we want, but I promised someone I would never let you feel forgotten. I made that promise with my whole heart, and I intend to keep it. You are never alone." A promise. Elaine stared at those words for a long time. A promise to whom? That evening, she pulled out an old photo album, one from the early 1960s. Gerald in his Navy uniform, smiling. And there, on the edge of one picture, Walter, just a boy back then, maybe 18. He always hovered just outside the center of things, quiet, observant. She remembered he used to play the piano. He'd sit on the porch with Gerald, drinking iced tea, listening to her hum as she worked in the garden. He had always watched her, kindly, gently. But after Gerald's death, Walter never lingered. He never overstepped. He just stayed near, delivering mail, leaving a letter, keeping his word. By a year 25, Elaine was 78. She no longer questioned the timing of the letters. She simply waited for them like one waits for spring crocuses, softly with quiet faith. But she also started to wonder. What happens when the letters stop? One day, after church, she sat by the fire with her friend Marion and finally said it aloud. "I think someone's been writing me letters for 25 years. Marion raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "I don't know," Elaine said. "But I think he knew my husband. Maybe even loved him. Or maybe he loved me." Her voice cracked. Marion took her hand. "That kind of devotion doesn't come around twice in one lifetime, Elaine. Whoever it is, he's kept you company in a way most people never get." Elaine nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just wish I knew who I was thanking." The Whitmore house was full of quiet secrets. Each room held a memory, each drawer a piece of a life shared and lost. Elaine walked slowly now, but her mind was sharp. The 26th letter had arrived just weeks earlier, and with it came a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She would find out the truth. She began in the attic. Boxes stacked neatly along the eaves, labeled in Gerald's careful handwriting. Summer 72. Christmas cards. Elaine's books. But tucked behind a stack of old quilts, she found a box with no label at all. Just a faded ribbon, tied once and never touched again. Inside were letters, not the anonymous kind. These were handwritten, all addressed to Gerald, postmarked from small towns across the Midwest. The handwriting was familiar, neat, slanted left, slightly formal. Walter. Her breath caught. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the wooden beams above creaking softly. She opened the first letter. Dear Gerald, I hope you're well. I miss the old days. Music on the porch, Elaine's laughter echoing in the yard. You don't say it, but I know. You see how she shines. I see it too. She blinked back tears. The letters continued. Dozens of them. Walter had written to Gerald for years. Quiet thoughts, observations. But slowly they shifted. They became confessions. I've carried this love in silence, brother. I never acted on it. I never will. But I see her, and I'll watch over her for both of us. Elaine covered her mouth. Walter had never intended for her to see these, but in every line there was a gentle, aching devotion, not just to her, but to Gerald, to the bond they'd shared, and to a promise that transcended grief. The next day, she stood by her front window, waiting. Walter arrived at 10:14 a.m., as he always did. She stepped outside before he could leave the porch. Walter! He turned, the look in his eyes, startled, almost childlike. I found your letters, she said softly. Silence. I didn't mean to, she added, but I read them. Walter set his bag down slowly, his hands trembling. You were never supposed to see those. They were beautiful, she whispered. He swallowed hard. I only ever wanted you to feel seen, to never feel alone. Elaine stepped closer. You made a promise to Gerald. I did, he said, eyes wet now. And I meant it. Every year, every letter. I never wanted anything in return. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But maybe it's time you heard something back. She reached out, gently taking his hand. Walter stood in Elaine's kitchen for the first time in over 40 years. It felt strange, familiar, sacred. She poured 2 cups of tea, just like she used to for Gerald and him back in the 1960s. Her hands were steady, but her heart trembled. Walter sat across from her at the small round table, eyes downcast, cap in his lap. You don't have to explain, she said quietly. But if you want to... I'm listening. Walter nodded. I never meant to make it about me. Not once. He stared at the steam rising from the cup. I was always the quiet one. Gerald had the charm, the laughter, the light. He loved you so easily. And I loved him for that. I envied it, but I respected it. You two, you had something sacred. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. We did, but you were always kind to me, even then. I just never saw it. Walter smiled faintly. That's the point. You weren't supposed to. He took a slow breath. After he passed, I used to walk past this house and worry. You were so strong on the outside, but I saw the sorrow in your eyes. And one day I sat down with my typewriter and thought, maybe words could do something my presence never could. Elaine held her cup closer. So you wrote me that first letter? Walter nodded. I typed it, left it in my own mailbox. Carried it with the rest of the mail to keep it from being traced. I figured, just one. One kind letter, one spring. She gave a soft laugh, and then 29 more. Walter looked up then, and for the first time, she saw the years etched in his face not as age, but as devotion. I never signed them because it was never about me, he said. It was about keeping a promise. To him and to you. I didn't want you to feel forgotten. Elaine reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You gave me more than comfort. You gave me hope. Year after year, you reminded me I was still seen. They sat in silence for a long moment. You could have moved on, she said. Found your own life. I did, he answered. This was my life. Keeping that promise. Later that evening, Elaine brought out the wooden box with the blue ribbon. Together, they opened every letter. Walter read some aloud, voice shaking with age and feeling. Elaine listened, eyes glistening, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. Each word now had a voice, a face, a soul. By the time they reached the last letter, the house felt warmer, lighter, like it had finally exhaled after decades of holding something sacred and unspoken. Walter folded his hands on the table. I never wanted credit. I just didn't want the silence to win. Elaine took his hand again. And it didn't, she said, because of you. It was April the 17th again. Elaine stood by the window just like she had every spring for 30 years. But this time she wasn't waiting alone. Walter stood beside her, his mailbag slung over one shoulder, though lighter now, just one letter inside. I suppose this is the last one, he said quietly. She turned to him. Is it? Walter didn't answer. He simply reached into the bag and pulled out an envelope. Same cream paper, same typewritten script. But this one was sealed with a small blue wax stamp. He handed it to her with both hands, eyes glistening. I wrote this one with my name, he whispered. Elaine opened it slowly, reverently, like it was the final page of a book that had changed her life. Dear Elaine, 30 years ago, I made a promise to a dying man, a man I loved like a brother. He asked me to look after you, and I swore I would. But the truth is, I didn't do it just for him. I did it for me, because I loved you too. Not the kind of love that asks for anything, not the kind that takes. Mine was quiet, constant, devoted. I watched you tend your garden. I watched you sit with your tea. I saw your strength in your sorrow, your grace in your loneliness. And every year, I tried to send you a piece of comfort, a reminder that you mattered, that someone was still there. And maybe I hoped that someday you'd feel it, that you'd know. This is my last letter. But not my last day beside you. If you'll let me, I'd like to sit with you now. No more secrets. Just two people who've spent a lifetime in silence, finally speaking aloud. With all my heart, Walter. Elaine didn't cry right away. She folded the letter slowly and held it to her chest. You carried all of this. For me? She asked. I didn't know how to stop, he said. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his face. Then don't. They sat in the garden that afternoon, no longer mailman and widow, just Walter and Elaine. There were no more letters, but from that day on there was presence, real, shared, seen, and sometimes that's the greatest love of all. The garden hadn't seen much care in years, but that spring something changed. Elaine began waking early again, before the sun peeked through the clouds and made her way to the backyard with a small trowel and gloves. Walter showed up one morning with fresh soil, wildflower seeds, and a gentle, knowing smile. They worked in silence at first, comfortable, familiar. No rush, no need to speak what already lived between them. The garden bloomed slowly as they did. Every rosebud, every sprouting green leaf seemed to echo something long buried. Forgotten joy, tender patience, the kind of hope that comes not from wishing, but from waiting, faithfully. Neighbors began to notice. Two gray-haired figures kneeling in the dirt, side by side, sharing thermoses of coffee and laughter that drifted through the hedges like songbirds. Elaine no longer watched the mailbox with longing. She watched Walter instead. His quiet gestures, his stories, the way he still looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd asked all his life. One afternoon, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "Do you ever wish you had said something sooner?" Elaine asked. Walter thought for a long time. "I used to, but then I realized maybe love isn't about the timing. Maybe it's about staying." Elaine nodded. "And you stayed." He reached over and took her hand. "I always will, as long as you'll let me." She smiled. "I already did." They never called it romance. Not exactly, but they shared meals, books, quiet glances. Elaine would lean into his shoulder during thunderstorms. He'd leave fresh flowers on her table each Friday morning. It wasn't about passion. It was about peace. About being seen after years of invisibility. One evening, Walter brought a small, weathered box. Inside it were copies of all 30 letters, typed again, neatly bound. "I wanted you to have them, in case someday someone else needs to know how deeply you were loved." Elaine held the book against her heart. "We'll put it in the garden, for the next bloom." The pen felt heavy in Elaine's hand. Not because of age, though her fingers did tremble a little, but because of the weight of what she needed to say. After 3 decades of receiving anonymous love, comfort, and hope, it was time to give something back. She chose the same kind of paper Walter had used. Creamy, textured, familiar. She lit a candle beside her writing desk, opened the window to let in the early summer breeze, and began. "To the one who needs this one day. If you found this letter, it means someone you love may no longer be here. Or maybe you feel alone, unseen, forgotten. I want you to know something I once forgot myself. Silence doesn't mean absence, and love doesn't always shout. Sometimes love waits at your gate every morning. Sometimes it leaves letters on your porch. Sometimes it sits beside you in the quiet, never asking for anything but your peace. I spent 30 years not knowing who was writing to me, and when I finally found out, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone who'd seen me, loved me, and honored me more than I ever knew. His name was Walter. He was kind. He was patient. And he saved me without ever asking to be my hero. So if you're reading this, I hope you remember, the people who love you most may never say the loudest words, but they'll show up, over and over, in springtime letters, in the garden, in the silence. Don't stop looking. And don't stop believing that the next chapter of your story might just begin when you least expect it. With all my heart, Elaine Whitmore." She folded the letter and placed it inside the wooden box now tucked beneath the garden's tallest rose bush. A place of beauty, of second chances. Walter watched from the porch, his eyes soft. "You wrote to the future." "I wrote to the person I used to be," she said. "And maybe someone else who needs it." The next day, they installed a small bench in the garden. On it, engraved in brass, were just 6 words. Love never left. It just waited. The following spring was different. The crocuses still bloomed. The roses returned in bursts of red and pale pink, but Walter, who had once risen early with the birds, now moved slower, held his side when he bent to the soil, and sat longer on the garden bench each morning. Elaine noticed, though he never complained. "Getting old isn't for the faint of heart," he chuckled one afternoon, wincing as he lowered himself beside her. She smiled gently. "We're not old, Walter. We're just well-aged." He laughed, that low, warm sound she had grown to treasure. But there was something different in his eyes. More glass than gleam. More goodbye than greeting. One day, while watering the lilies, Elaine found him asleep on the bench. Except he wasn't asleep. His hand still rested on the copy of the 30 letters. His cap, always so carefully worn, lay on the ground beside him. The sun painted golden light across his face, and the spring breeze rustled the pages of the book like a whisper. He looked peaceful. Elaine didn't cry right away. She sat beside him and held his hand, her thumb brushing the edge of his. Then, very quietly, she whispered, "You kept your promise." The days that followed moved like fog. There were flowers, dozens of them, cards, neighbors stopping by, a kind church service filled with soft hymns and silent tears. Elaine spoke only once at the service. "He gave me 30 springs," she said, "and not a single one was wasted." People cried, not for tragedy, but for the beauty of it all. The dignity of love that asks for nothing, gives everything, and lives quietly in the heart of time. Back home, Elaine sat in the garden each morning, the same way Walter used to. Sometimes she would speak to him, sometimes she would say nothing at all, but one morning she found a small envelope tucked into her mailbox. Not typewritten, handwritten, in soft, uneven lines. "Dear Elaine, if you're reading this, then I've finally given you back to the world. Thank you for letting me stay beside you. Thank you for letting my silence speak. You were never alone, and you never will be. Not while I'm in this garden, in these letters, and in every spring that follows. Love, always, Walter." Elaine didn't leave the garden. As the final image of the garden fades and Elaine's story comes to a quiet close, we're left with one question that lingers like spring air. How many letters of love have we missed, simply because they weren't signed? Sometimes the people who care for us the most don't speak loudly. They write softly. They stay quietly. They love deeply, without asking to be seen. So now we ask you, have you ever received something, a gesture, a letter, a moment, that stayed with you for years? Did someone once keep a promise you didn't even know you needed? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And if this story touched your heart, give it a like, subscribe for more deeply emotional true love stories, and watch the next story on your screen now, one that might just move you even more than this one. Because here, forever starts late, but love always arrives on time. Not in spirit, at least. She continued to rise with the sun, to water the flowers, to prune the roses Walter once planted with hands now gone but never forgotten. Neighbors would see her there, older, slower, but somehow fuller. Like she was still living inside a story that hadn't ended. And in a way, she was. She began inviting others to sit on the garden bench. A widow from church who had lost her husband to cancer. A young man grieving his father. A single mother trying to understand her own worth. They came and they listened. Or they sat in silence. And each time they left, she handed them a letter. Not Walter's letters. Those remained sacred. These were her own. Short, handwritten messages of hope, of understanding, of simple, powerful reminders. You are not alone. Time can be cruel, but it can also be kind. Love never dies. It changes form. And on the back of each envelope she stamped a tiny blue wax seal. She renamed the garden, the Bloom House, a place of healing, of remembrance, of beginnings that arrive after the last chapter closes. Local children came to help plant tulips. Volunteers helped build a second bench. And beneath a shaded tree, a small plaque was added beside Walter's. Here, letters turned into life. Elaine lived well into her 90s. She never remarried. She didn't need to. Love had not left her. It had waited. It had written. It had bloomed. And when her time came, she left behind her own box of 30 letters, one for each spring Walter had given her. Letters addressed not to a name, but to whoever found them. To you, the next soul in need. Because in the end, Elaine understood something few ever truly do. That real love is not about being seen in the spotlight of life. It's about being held in the quiet, over time, through silence, in spring after spring of gentle, faithful presence.